Camp Rupert, Idaho, 1944. The first Japanese woman I ever saw in chains looked at a rack of smoked ribs as if they were live explosives. Steam curled off the meat, carried by hickory smoke drifting across the compound, and the shock of it all made my breath stick. I had come here to heal, not to be thrown into another kind of battlefield, yet the sight of her, thin, pale, eyes hollow but unbroken, slammed into me harder than the shrapnel that tore up my leg on Leyte. They told me this assignment would be quiet, a place to rest and let my wounds settle. No screaming artillery, no bodies to carry, no friends dying with my name in their mouths. Just light duty. Paperwork. Routine. But the guilt rode with me from the Philippines all the way to Idaho, lodged behind my ribs like a buried bullet. Harris. Kincaid. 2 men I couldn't save. I had stepped off the train believing the worst was behind me. Then the trucks appeared. They rolled through the gates just after dawn, engines coughing in the cold. Snow melt dripped from the razor wire, turning the yard into a patchwork of slush and mud. I leaned on my crutch near the processing table, expecting another batch of German farm boys, the kind who grumbled about American cigarettes and asked if we had radios. Instead, the first figure to climb out wore a Japanese field nurse's armband and a stare sharper than barbed wire. She was small, almost delicate at a distance, but something in her posture warned me she was anything but fragile. Her boots were splashed with half-frozen mud, her khaki uniform sagged from weeks of wear, and her hands were bound with rope that looked too rough for wrists that narrow. Her hair was tightly pulled back, a single loose strand stuck to her cheek by the cold. When her gaze swept across the compound, it carried neither fear nor submission, only the determination of someone who had survived more than I could guess. The sergeant beside me muttered under his breath, "Christ, Hensley! They didn't say anything about women." I didn't respond. The word women felt too simple. War had stripped meaning from language, enemy, ally, duty, honor. None of it fit anymore. The woman stepping down from the truck didn't match any category I'd been trained to recognize. She avoided the helping hand of the MP, brushing him off with a small gesture that was almost defiant. Major Charles Brady emerged from the admin building with the face of a man who just discovered the Army regulations didn't have a section for this. Japanese women in Idaho. Under his command. His jaw tightened as he waved me forward. "Hensley, if you're upright, you're working. Process them." My leg throbbed, but work was better than being alone with memories. I moved to the table as the prisoners lined up, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The smell of wet wool mixed with the distant smoke from the cookhouse. The cooks were already firing up the pits for a morale meal, ribs, corn, whatever the farmers had donated. It was supposed to keep everyone cooperative, the guards, the locals, the POWs. Barbecue meant America. Warmth. Normal life. Even in war. The smoke drifted over us, drifting through the lines of POWs. A few of the Japanese men couldn't help turning toward it. The woman with the nurse's band didn't move her head, but her throat tightened like she was forcing down a memory. Festival food, maybe? Childhood. A different life. When she reached my table, I lifted the clipboard. The capture papers were smudged, but her name was still clear. Aiko Sato, I read. Medical Corps. Captured on Leyte. Her eyes snapped to mine at the word Leyte. A sharp, searching look. Pain flickered there, recognition, loss, defiance, all tangled together. And suddenly the smell of smoke didn't remind me of barbecue. It reminded me of burning villages, the heat from shell impacts, the cries of wounded men clutching at my hands. A folded blanket lay at the edge of my table, one I had quietly kept aside. Idaho cold went through bone like shrapnel. I pushed it toward her. "It's freezing out here," I said. "Take it." The compound went quiet. The line behind her stopped shifting. The MP's grip tightened on his rifle. A farmer's truck rumbled past outside the fence, but even that sound seemed distant, muffled. She stared at the blanket, then lifted her eyes again, slowly, deliberately. When she spoke, her English was shaped with surgical precision. "Are you offering mercy?" she asked. Or humiliation? The words hit with the force of a mortar blast. For 1 second the yard blurred, replaced by the rain-soaked chaos of Lady Harris shouting my name, Kincaid slipping from my arms, smoke stinging my eyes. And here, in the cold Idaho morning, a woman I was told to fear was asking me to choose the kind of man I wanted to be. She didn't look away. She waited. Calm. Serious. Expecting nothing. My fingers loosened from the blanket. I slid it fully into her bound hands. It's just a blanket, I said quietly. What it means is for you to decide. Something in her expression shifted, tiny, fragile, real. Not gratitude. Not trust. But the first crack in armor built by war. She moved on, clutching the blanket to her chest. The line resumed. Snow crunched. Smoke drifted. And I stood there knowing that for reasons I couldn't explain, everything inside me had changed in the moment she spoke. The days that followed felt colder, even though the Idaho sun had started melting the last winter patches along the fence line. Maybe it was because every time I passed the women's barracks, I could feel Aiko Sato's eyes on me without actually seeing her. She remained a ghost in the corner of my awareness, silent, watchful, refusing to acknowledge the American world around her except when survival required it. And yet, I found myself noticing the smallest things about her. The way she wrapped the blanket I'd given her with almost ceremonial care. The way she kept her back straight even when the wind cut across the yard so hard it lifted dust from the ground. The way she spoke to the other women in soft, clipped tones meant to prevent them from fracturing under the weight of captivity. Major Brady claimed that processing female POWs required extra caution. The War Department wanted everything documented, double-signed, and triple-verified. We were understaffed. Nurses were busy. Guards were overworked. And that left me, a limping corporal with too much time to think and not enough excuses to avoid the job. Most mornings I stood outside the medical tent while the women received examinations. The American nurses handled the procedures professionally, but the tension was thick enough to feel. Japanese men had entered our camps before, but Japanese women, especially trained medical personnel, brought rumors nobody wanted to speak aloud. And fear has a smell. It lingers between people. On the third morning, I spotted Aiko standing alone near the edge of the yard. She held a small cloth bag, contraband, technically, though harmless. Probably a keepsake, maybe a scrap of home. I was supposed to confiscate anything unlisted, but something in the way she pressed the bag to her chest made the order dissolve before it reached my hand. When I approached, she didn't look up. I cleared my throat quietly, not wanting to startle her. Miss Sato, I said. The nurses need to check your bandages. They asked me to find you. She didn't answer right away, and for a moment I wondered if she would pretend she didn't understand me. But then she spoke, her voice soft and even. I am not injured. They still have to record it, I replied. Regulations. Regulations, she repeated, as if tasting a foreign word. Your army has many. You should see the paperwork, I said, attempting humor. It's a war crime of its own. Her lips didn't form a smile, but the stiff focus in her eyes softened for a fraction of a second. She allowed me to walk with her toward the tent, though she kept a careful distance, as if proximity itself was dangerous. I didn't push it. Not after the way she looked at me when she asked whether my kindness was mercy or humiliation. Inside the tent, the nurses murmured instructions and took notes. Aiko sat rigidly while one examined her pulse. Another tested her reflexes. And I stood in the corner, pretending to organize supply logs while my eyes drifted toward her every few seconds. She caught me once. I looked away so fast I nearly dropped the clipboard. When the examination ended, she rose quietly. I expected her to leave without a word, but instead she waited until the nurses were out of earshot. You watch me, she said. I froze. I watch all the prisoners. No, she said. You watch me. She wasn't accusing me of anything, but her tone carried something I couldn't decipher, curiosity, maybe, or warning. I didn't know what to say, so I told the truth. "I'm trying to understand you," I said. "That's all." She tilted her head slightly. "Understand, an enemy?" I swallowed the urge to argue. Not because she was wrong, but because she wasn't ready for the truth hidden beneath her question. I wasn't sure I was ready either. Later that day, a group of potato farmers from the nearby valley arrived with crates of vegetables for the camp kitchens. One of them, a red-faced man with a thick jacket and a voice that carried across the yard, pointed at the POW women as if they were livestock. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said loudly. "Jap women here, right in Idaho. What's the world coming to?" I stepped in front of him. "They're prisoners under U.S. custody. Show some respect." The farmer snorted. "You're kidding, right? After Pearl Harbor? After Bataan? And you want us to treat them like guests?" "I didn't say guests," I said. "Just human beings." Aiko was within earshot. She said nothing, but her posture changed, barely, but enough for me to notice. The farmer muttered something under his breath before hauling a crate toward the kitchen. I stood there longer than necessary, hoping she knew I wasn't trying to earn favor. It wasn't about her. It was about war. And about how people stop seeing each other when uniforms replace faces. That night the sky turned a deep orange as the cooks tested the barbecue pits for the upcoming feast. Smoke drifted over the camp like a low river of scent, sweet, warm, strange. It didn't belong to war. It belonged to home. To Sunday afternoons. To peace, even if it was temporary. I saw Aiko again near the wire fence. She stared at the rising smoke with an expression I had never seen before on her, something close to longing. "You've smelled this before?" I asked quietly. She flinched at my voice, then nodded once. "Not this. But something like it. When I was a child." The wind shifted, carrying the scent toward her. She closed her eyes. "What does it mean?" she whispered softly, maybe not even to me. I didn't have an answer. I wished I did. All I knew was that something inside her had stirred for the first time. And something inside me did too. The morning of the barbecue felt strangely alive, as if the entire camp had been waiting months for a day that wasn't shaped by orders, inspections, or fear. The sky was clear, the kind of bright Idaho blue that made the snowcaps glow along the distant mountains. Even the guards walked with lighter steps. The cooks were already working by dawn, their fires crackling, the scent of hickory wood drifting through every corner of Camp Rupert. Barbecue days were rare, partly because they took effort and partly because they reminded everyone of normal life, something soldiers and prisoners both needed more than they knew. The POW men watched from their designated area with cautious interest. The POW women watched with a different kind of tension, their expressions guarded. Aiko stood slightly apart from the others, arms crossed, her blanket wrapped around her shoulders. I tried not to stare, but my eyes kept drifting to her anyway. The scent of slow-cooked meat filled the air, sweet and smoky, and I wondered if it stirred something inside her again. Major Brady walked past me with a clipboard. "Tried to keep things orderly, Hensley. Civilians will be here soon. And keep an eye on the women. There's still an unknown variable." "I understand, sir." "Good. Last thing we need is trouble during a damn cookout." Trouble was exactly what we got. But not the kind he meant. The first group of civilians arrived around mid-morning, farmers, teachers, a few local families. Kids pressed their faces against the fence to stare at the POWs. Some adults did too, their expressions stiff, uncertain whether sympathy or suspicion should guide them. A few whispered. Some glared openly. But the smell of barbecue softened the hard lines on nearly every face. The cooks worked in a row behind the mess hall, tending large metal drums and open pits. Smoke rose from them in long, steady columns. I felt the heat on my face as I passed by, watching them baste ribs and brisket with thick sauce. My stomach grumbled. For the first time in months, I felt like a human being rather than a cog inside a war machine. Then I glanced toward the women's compound. Aiko was standing very still, her eyes fixed on the pits with a look I hadn't seen before. Not fear. Not anger. Something like wonder, quickly hidden when she realized I was watching her. I hesitated, then approached the gate. The guard there gave me a nod and let me through. I stopped a few steps from her. "You okay?" She didn't answer at first. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "The smell is confusing." "How so?" "It reminds me of a festival in Osaka," she said. "Before the war. Before everything changed." I nodded, unsure what to say. She looked at me then, her expression unreadable. "Why do you keep speaking to me, Corporal?" she asked. "You have no obligation." "Maybe I'm bad at following the unwritten rules," I said. "Or maybe I'm tired of acting like everyone the army tells me to fear is the same." Her eyes softened just a fraction, but before she could reply, a shout erupted from behind us. "Look out!" A guard near the pits slipped on a patch of mud. He fell backward into a stack of oil drums used to grease the cooking grates. One of the drums toppled, smashing into the edge of the pit. A burst of flame shot upward with a sound like a cannon blast. Civilians screamed and stumbled back. Smoke exploded into the air. Someone yelled for water. Another shouted for a medic. Instinct took over before thought could catch up. I rushed forward, ignoring the sharp pain shooting through my leg. The guard on the ground was screaming, clutching his arm, his uniform sleeve burning. 2 cooks tried to help but withdrew when the flames surged. Aiko saw him too. And then she moved. Not cautiously. Not hesitantly. She moved with the precision of a trained battlefield nurse. She sprinted past frightened civilians, ducked around the flaming pit, and dropped to her knees beside the injured guard. "Water!" she shouted. "Cloth! Now!" Her English was crisp, commanding, startlingly loud. A stunned cook handed her a bucket. She soaked her scarf and pressed it to the guard's burns, muttering instructions under her breath. I limped to her side and helped hold the man steady. He was trembling, nearly incoherent, but Aiko's voice cut through his panic. "Stay awake," she told him firmly. "You will live." Civilians gaped. Guards stared. It was as if time had frozen around her. A Japanese POW woman, an enemy, kneeling beside an American soldier, treating him with more urgency and skill than half the medics I had served with. Major Brady arrived breathless, eyes wide. "Hensley! What the hell?" "She's saving his life, sir," I said. Brady bent down, watching her work. He looked like a man witnessing something he could not justify in any military manual. She wrapped makeshift bandages, applied pressure, and ordered a stretcher like she ran the place. When medics finally pushed through the crowd to carry the guard away, she stood slowly, wiping her hands on her uniform. The yard was silent. A Japanese woman had just saved an American soldier in front of half the town. A farmer whispered, "I'll be damned." Aiko stepped back, her breath unsteady, the weight of attention pressing on her. She didn't look proud or afraid, only exhausted. I stood beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she knew she wasn't alone. For the first time since arriving at Camp Rupert, she looked at me without walls, without caution, without calculation. And quietly, just loud enough for me to hear, she said, "I could not watch someone burn. Enemy or not." Something inside me shifted. Permanently. And I knew the next part of this story would demand a price either of us was ready for. The camp was never the same after the fire. People spoke differently, moved differently, looked at each other with a new sort of caution, as if the world had shifted an inch to the left, and no one yet understood the new balance. Civilians who had once stared at the POW women with suspicion now whispered about the Japanese nurse who saved that guard's life. A few even asked Major Brady if the women could be allowed small comforts. He declined, of course. Regulations were unyielding, but the mere fact people asked said everything. Aiko, however, didn't seem changed by the attention. She walked with the same composed steps, spoke only when necessary, and worked quietly among her fellow prisoners. But something in her presence had altered. The other women watched her differently, not with envy but with a kind of awe. They had seen her move toward flame without hesitation, while armed men backed away. They had seen Americans whisper her name with softened voices. Survival in a POW camp was built on tiny shifts like this. I saw her more often now. Sometimes she stood alone near the fence at dusk, eyes tracking the horizon where the mountains swallowed the sun. Other times she helped an older POW who limped in the cold morning air. Once, I found her kneeling on the ground after one of the women fainted, checking the woman's pulse with the care of a sister. Each moment carved itself deeper into me, like the war had etched new scars inside my chest, but this time without pain. One afternoon, as I crossed the yard carrying a box of medical supplies, I spotted her sitting on a bench behind the barracks. She was alone, the blanket I'd given her folded neatly beside her. The wind stirred her hair, loosening a few strands. She looked peaceful in a way I had never seen before. "May I sit?" I asked. She considered the question longer than it required, then nodded. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that feels deliberate instead of awkward. Finally she spoke. "The guard who burned, how is he?" "He'll recover," I said. "The doctors said your quick treatment saved the arm. Maybe his life." She nodded once, then lowered her gaze to her hands. "I have treated many soldiers. Japanese, American, Filipino. In war, wounds do not care about flags." Her words carried something heavy, memory, regret, maybe both. "You saved him because you're a healer," I said. "Nothing else mattered." She turned toward me slowly. "If I had done nothing, he would have died. And yet, I am the prisoner. He is the soldier. What would your people have said then?" "They'd still be talking," I said. "But differently." A faint smile touched her mouth, small enough to miss if I blinked. "Mr. Hensley," she said softly, "you try to make the world kind. I try to make it fair," I answered. "Kindness is harder." She studied my face in that careful, searching way she had, as if she could see the things I didn't say, the guilt, the losses, the lonely weight I carried. Before she could speak again, Major Brady called my name from across the yard. His expression was grim, the kind he wore when bad news traveled ahead of him. "Hensley!" Inside. "Now." I stood. She stood. And somehow that small movement felt like the beginning of something cracking open. Inside Brady's office, the air felt colder than outside. "Japan has surrendered," he said without preamble. "The war's officially over. Orders are coming through. All Japanese POWs, men and women, are being processed for rapid repatriation. Ships are being prepared on the west coast." My throat tightened. "How soon?" "Days. Maybe a week. The women will be among the first sent out." I leaned on the desk without meaning to. "Sir, some of them are still recovering." "There." "Hensley," he interrupted. "This is happening whether we like it or not. They're going home. That's the end of it." I nodded, but the acceptance didn't reach my chest. I left his office feeling like I had been shot again, wounded somewhere vital and invisible. The next morning, the women were lined up for transport instructions. Aiko stood at the front, her face calm but unreadable. She had steeled herself, the same way soldiers do before receiving orders that will tear them from the few things that kept them breathing. She saw me approach, and for the first time she spoke without waiting for me. "You knew," she said quietly. "I found out yesterday. And you said nothing." "What would I have said?" I asked. "That I didn't want you to leave? That I cut myself off." The words felt too big, too heavy for this place. Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "War ends. People return to where they came from. You don't have to disappear," I said. "Not completely." She looked down at her hands, then at me again. "We are prisoners, Corporal. Our fates are written by armies, not by wishes." That afternoon, as the sun dipped, I found her standing by the fence, quiet, distant, but waiting. The women were being moved to the holding trucks at dawn. This was our last moment. "I don't know how to say goodbye," I admitted. "We do not need to say it," she replied. "We only need to remember." The wind carried the faint scent of smoke from the dying embers of the barbecue pits. She closed her eyes, breathing it in. When I tasted the food that day, she said, for a moment I remembered a world before war. You gave that moment back to me. You gave something back to me too, I said. You made me feel human again. Her eyes glistened, not tears, but something deeper. She stepped 1 inch closer, the closest she'd ever allowed. If the world had been different, she whispered, perhaps we would have shared more than smoke and fear. I wanted to reach for her, but the rules held both our hands still. At dawn, she climbed onto the truck without looking back. But when it drove away, a scrap of folded paper dropped from where she had been standing. I picked it up and found a single line written in delicate English. I can still smell the barbecue. I held it tight, knowing I'd never forget the scent either.